The ship appeared without warning, a silent shadow in the sky, its surface gleaming like liquid metal as it hovered above the planet. No one knew where it had come from, or who it belonged to. The military scrambled to respond. Fighter jets were launched in every direction trying to intercept, but the ship moved faster than anything they had ever seen. It didn't land. Instead, it just stayed there, suspended in the air, as if observing the earth below it was a quiet invasion. The world held its breath, not understanding what was happening, yet at the same time a terrifying sense of dread began to settle over every nation. Whispers of an alien presence spread across the globe. Fear began to take root in people's hearts. Then the first signs of something wrong began to emerge all around the world. Strange occurrences began to happen. People fell ill suddenly, and without warning, one by one, entire families started coughing uncontrollably. Within hours, their bodies were burning with fever, their skin paling, and their minds descending into delirium. It spread quickly, faster than anything any disease experts had ever seen. There were no warnings, no symptoms before it struck, but it was deadly, and the death toll climbed higher by the hour. Hospitals were overwhelmed as doctors and nurses scrambled to treat the infected, but nothing worked. Nothing could slow the spread. People started to panic. Mass hysteria set in as people turned on each other in fear of being next. Long lines formed outside pharmacies and clinics hoping for some sort of cure, but there was none. The virus was a shape-shifting beast. Every attempt to develop a vaccine failed. The disease mutated with every passing day. There were whispers of hope from scientists around the world that a cure could be found, but as the virus evolved, it seemed impossible to keep up with its rapid changes. Every new strain was worse than the last. Soon entire cities began to fall into ruin. As those infected couldn't be contained, entire neighborhoods were quarantined, but the virus was too widespread to be stopped. Millions were already dead, and more were dying by the hour. The leaders of nations met in secret to discuss what could be done, but their plans faltered at every turn. They tried to mobilize the military to enforce order, but how do you fight something you can't even see? How do you protect a planet from an enemy that's invisible? In the chaos of it all, there were reports from the farthest corners of the earth, people claiming to see strange lights in the sky, not just from the alien ship, but from something else, something that moved with purpose. These sightings spread across social media as people scrambled to understand what was happening, but all of it remained unexplained until one scientist made a breakthrough. The virus wasn't just killing, it was changing the very genetic structure of its hosts, mutating them into something else, something new. It was this discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The virus was far more than a simple disease. It was a tool, a weapon designed to alter humanity itself, a weapon that had been unleashed not just to destroy, but to transform. And Earth was now in a battle, not only for survival, but for its very future. In the wake of the plague's relentless spread, a small group of scientists gathered in secret to discuss what they had discovered. At first, they thought it was just a cruel mutation of the virus, a virus so deadly it seemed to defy all human understanding. But something didn't sit right. The way it spread so rapidly, the way it seemed to target specific areas of the human body. There was an eerie precision to it, as though it was purposeful, like it was evolving and adapting almost too quickly for nature to allow. It was Dr. Evelyn Miles, a geneticist, who first uncovered the truth. She had been studying the virus under a microscope for days, watching its rapid changes, and something caught her attention. The virus wasn't just attacking cells, it was rewriting them. It wasn't merely killing its hosts, it was altering them, changing their genetic code. At an alarming rate, her heart raced as she began to make the connection. This virus wasn't a random pathogen. It had been engineered to manipulate DNA to evolve its host into something else, something beyond humanity itself. She shared her findings with her team, and soon it became clear to them that the virus wasn't just destroying Earth's population, it was shaping the survivors into something new, and it was doing so on purpose. This wasn't an accidental mutation. This was a weaponized disease, designed not just to wipe out humans, but to create a new breed of them, something stronger, faster, smarter than ever before, but no one could explain why. The government was slow to respond as panic spread, and people continued to die by the millions, But the small team of scientists had their own plan. They realized that their only hope to understand the virus was to study it from within, to expose humans to the infection in a controlled environment, and see what happened. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and though the risks were staggering, there was no other choice. Dr. Miles and her team made a dangerous decision. They selected a group of volunteers willing to risk their lives to be exposed to the virus. In an attempt to study its effects firsthand, they injected them with a weakened strain of the virus and waited for the inevitable. The volunteers fell ill as expected, their bodies burning with fever and writhing in pain. But what came next shocked everyone. The virus didn't just kill them, it began to change them. Their bodies adapted to the virus in ways that defied all medical understanding. At first, the changes were subtle. Their senses became heightened. They could hear sounds from miles away. Their eyesight became sharper. Their strength increased beyond normal human limits. But as days passed, the mutations became more pronounced. Their bodies began to heal faster than ever before. Wounds closed up within minutes, and their minds became clearer, sharper. Their intelligence grew at an exponential rate. They could process information faster than any computer and communicate telepathically with one another. It was as if the virus had awakened something buried deep within the human genome, something dormant for centuries. The volunteers were transformed into something not quite human anymore, something more than human, something that transcended the limitations of biology itself. They had become a new breed of humanity, a species that could survive the plague and perhaps even control it. But the implications of their transformation were staggering. They were not just immune to the virus, they were its masters. They could control its effects. And with their newfound powers came a terrifying realization. They were no longer just survivors, they were the future of humanity. The world watched in disbelief as news of the evolved humans spread like wildfire. They were the last hope for humanity, but they were also a terrifying unknown. What did it mean for the future of mankind? If these humans were the next step in evolution, if they held the key to survival, but also the power to reshape the world itself, would they be humanity's saviors or its conquerors? Only time would tell as the plague continued to ravage the planet, and the evolved ones struggled to understand the full extent of their new abilities. As the days turned into weeks, the transformed volunteers began to show signs of their new power. They were no longer the frail humans who had once been infected by the plague. Their bodies had adapted, their minds had evolved. They could move faster, think clearer, see farther, and heal in ways that defied all logic. Their senses were heightened beyond human limits, and they communicated with one another telepathically in a shared consciousness that made them feel connected in ways no human had ever experienced before. They were no longer individuals. They were a collective, a singular force united by the changes within them. News of their transformation spread like wildfire across the globe. Some called them miracles, others called them monsters. No one knew what to make of them. The governments of the world hesitated to act, fearing what these evolved humans might become. The old power structures began to collapse as panic spread through society. Fear took root in every corner of the planet. There were protests against the evolved, calling for their eradication, while others argued they were the only hope for humanity's future. But despite the fear and uncertainty, the evolved ones began to take control. The first group of evolved humans began to gather in secret. They formed their own community, far from the chaos of the infected cities and government militaries. They studied their abilities, learning to harness their powers, and train themselves to survive in a world that was rapidly descending into madness. Their bodies became stronger, their minds sharper, and they started to develop new abilities even beyond what had been seen before. They could manipulate energy, create force fields, heal others with a touch, and even read the minds of those around them. As they grew more powerful, they began to see themselves not as survivors, but as a new breed of humanity. They were no longer limited by the weaknesses of the human body or mind. They had evolved beyond those constraints. They were something else, something that was both human and not human at the same time. And with that realization came a difficult question. If they were the next step in human evolution, were they still bound by the same moral and ethical codes that had governed humanity for so long? Meanwhile, The world outside their hidden community grew more unstable as the plague continued to ravage the population. Entire cities fell to the virus, governments collapsed, and society began to break down. But the evolved ones were untouched by the plague. They were immune to its effects. And as the days wore on, they began to grow more confident in their newfound abilities. They realized that they were not just immune to the disease, they were its cure. Their bodies had developed a resistance that could be shared with others. But the question remained, could they save humanity, or were they destined to rule over what was left of the world? The tension between the evolved and the remaining survivors continued to escalate. As the world struggled to survive, the old world order was gone, and in its place, a new one began to take shape. The evolved ones had the power to lead, but not everyone trusted them. There were factions who believed they were too dangerous, too unpredictable, and who feared that their abilities might one day be turned against humanity itself. Still, the evolved ones pressed forward. They knew that they were the only ones capable of saving what was left of the world. But with every step forward came a new challenge. The virus had altered more than just their bodies. It had altered their very way of thinking. They could no longer relate to the struggles of ordinary humans. They were something beyond that, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to remember what it meant to be truly human. As the world continued to spiral out of control, the evolved ones faced a choice. Would they stay hidden and protect what was left of humanity, or would they step forward and take their place as rulers of the new world they had created? The evolved ones began to feel the weight of their power growing with each passing day. They were no longer just survivors of the plague. They were the architects of a new future, a future where humanity was no longer bound by the limitations of its past. Their bodies had changed, and so had their minds. They could no longer ignore the implications of their abilities. They could sense each other's thoughts, feel each other's emotions, and communicate in ways that no human could ever comprehend. They were becoming something beyond human, yet still undeniably tied to the species they had once been. The world outside their enclave had descended further into chaos. Entire regions were abandoned as the plague continued to ravage the population. Governments had dissolved, and the military no longer had the power to restore order. In some places, the old borders were erased, and people were left to fend for themselves. Entire societies had collapsed in the wake of the plague, and what was left were pockets of survivors clinging to life in a world where civilization had broken down. The evolved ones knew they could not remain hidden forever. They had the power to reshape the world, to rebuild it. But with that power came a responsibility, and a fear, the fear that their new abilities would make them targets of those who feared what they had become. Not everyone saw them as a solution to the plague. Many saw them as a threat, something that was too dangerous to be allowed to exist in the old world. Power was concentrated in the hands of a few, but now the evolved ones held that power, and it was clear that not all of humanity would accept this new reality. The factions began to form. Those who believed the evolved ones were the next step in human evolution and should lead the way into a new era, and those who feared their power and sought to destroy them. Some were driven by religious belief, others by political ideologies, but they all shared the same goal: to stop the evolved ones from taking control of the planet. In the chaos of the New World, alliances were formed and broken at a rapid pace, and the evolved ones realized that the war for Earth had begun. In secret, the evolved ones began to prepare for the inevitable conflict. They knew that they could not simply allow the remaining human factions to tear them down. They would have to fight back. But they were not the only ones changing. As the world collapsed, new forces were rising in response to the evolved ones' existence. Those who were immune to the virus were also beginning to develop new abilities. Their own mutations were more subtle but dangerous nonetheless. They were starting to organize into groups ready to challenge the new world the evolved ones sought to build. As the war began to take shape, the evolved ones found themselves divided. Some believed that they should rule with an iron fist, creating a new world where they were the unquestioned leaders. Others argued that they should lead by example, guiding humanity into a new era without subjugation. But no matter the approach, the battle was inevitable. The conflict had already begun, and it would not be long before the world was torn between the evolved ones and those who would stop them. In the midst of this conflict, a new revelation came to light. The alien ship that had appeared over Earth so many weeks ago had not left. It was still there, watching, observing, and waiting. Its intentions unclear, but its presence undeniable. They were not alone in this war. The aliens had come to Earth for a reason, and the evolved ones knew they would soon face an enemy greater than any they had ever imagined. Their abilities may have made them the most powerful force on the planet, but the true battle was just beginning. And it would not just be fought against humanity, but against an invader from the stars. The evolved ones could feel it in the air. Something was coming, something darker than the war between factions on Earth, something far beyond the struggles of human nature. As they gathered in secret councils, their minds intertwined in a collective awareness, the presence of the alien ship still loomed in the sky, its silent shadow hanging over the world like a harbinger of doom. The ship had not moved for weeks. It had simply watched and waited, but its stillness was no comfort. The evolved ones knew it was only a matter of time before the aliens made their move. The first signs came in the dead of night, when strange lights appeared in the sky. More than just the ship that had arrived so long ago, smaller vessels began to descend from the darkness of space. They moved swiftly and quietly, like predators hunting their prey, and they landed in various locations across the globe. The world was already reeling from the plague, the broken governments, the fractured societies, the fear of the unknown, but nothing prepared humanity for the alien arrival. Cities began to fall without warning. The alien ships unleashed devastating weapons on the surface of the Earth, energy beams that tore through buildings and incinerated anything in their path. They moved with precision, as though they knew exactly where to strike. And the destruction was overwhelming. The evolved ones could feel the threat as it grew closer. They knew this was not just an invasion. This was the beginning of a war that they had never anticipated, a war that would pit them against an enemy far more advanced than they were. As the alien forces began to establish a foothold on the planet, the evolved ones mobilized. They gathered their strength and prepared for the battle they knew was coming. But there were no easy answers. The alien invaders were far beyond them. Technologically, their ships were nearly invulnerable, their weapons more powerful than anything humanity had ever encountered. They were a force that could not be defeated with brute strength alone. The evolved ones would need to use their abilities in ways they had never imagined before. For the first time in their existence, the evolved ones felt fear. They had become the next stage of human evolution. But they were still human. They were still vulnerable in ways they had never considered, and the alien invaders showed no mercy. Their forces poured into Earth's cities with ruthless efficiency, leaving destruction in their wake. The world's military forces could do little more than watch as the aliens decimated the remaining strongholds of humanity. But the evolved ones refused to surrender. They gathered together across the world, using their telepathic connection to coordinate their efforts. They shared information and tactics. They could feel the power of each other's minds, and they knew that they were stronger together than apart. Still, it wasn't enough to stop the alien onslaught. The aliens had technology that defied logic and weapons that could obliterate entire cities with a single strike. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the evolved ones fought back. They used their enhanced abilities to launch covert attacks on the alien forces, striking from the shadows, using their speed, strength, and newfound mental powers to tear down alien bases, sabotage their weapons, and free those who had been captured. But with every victory came a new wave of alien reinforcements, and the realization that this would not be a war won by small skirmishes. This was a war for the survival of Earth and all of humanity. The evolved ones knew that they could not fight the alien forces alone. They would need to unite the fractured human factions and forge a new alliance if they were to stand a chance at defeating the invaders. As the conflict escalated, the evolved ones became leaders of the last remaining human resistance. They stood at the front lines of every battle, guiding their people through the chaos and the destruction. They knew the stakes had never been higher. If they failed this time, humanity would be wiped from the galaxy, and the invaders would claim the Earth as their own. But with their enhanced abilities, the evolved ones were more than just soldiers. They were humanity's final hope. And as the war raged on, they began to uncover a shocking truth. The aliens had not come to Earth by chance. They had been watching the planet for millennia, and they had come to destroy not just humanity, but the very thing that made humanity unique. The battle raged on across Earth. The evolved ones fought with a ferocity and determination that no human had ever shown before. Their abilities made them formidable warriors capable of withstanding the alien onslaught. But the alien forces were relentless. They had technologies far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Their ships could tear through Earth's defenses with ease. Their weapons disintegrated anything in their path, and their forces were seemingly endless. For every alien fleet that fell, another would take its place. As the evolved ones led the human resistance against the invaders, they began to uncover the true nature of the alien threat. The invaders had not come to Earth simply to conquer. They had come to destroy the very essence of humanity. The alien empire that had sent the plague and now sought to invade had known of humanity's potential for centuries and feared it. They had watched as humanity struggled to survive the plague, and now they had seen what the evolved ones had become. They had seen humanity evolve beyond its original limitations, and what had once been a fear of an underdeveloped species had now become a fear of an uncontrollable one. The evolved ones were not just immune to the plague, they had transcended it. They had unlocked the full potential of the human genome, and the aliens saw that as a threat to their empire. They feared that if humanity were allowed to evolve further, the Earth would become the most powerful force in the galaxy, a force that could challenge their supremacy, a force that could destroy them. The alien empire could not allow that to happen. They could not allow humanity to reach its full potential, so they had sent the plague to weaken the population and eradicate any possibility of resistance. The truth shook the evolved ones to their core. They had been manipulated from the beginning. The plague had not been a random event. It had been a deliberate attack designed to trigger humanity's evolution, but also to force them into a position where they could be controlled, where they could be wiped out before they became too powerful. But the evolved ones had broken free from that control, and now they stood as the last line of defense against the alien empire. With this knowledge, the evolved ones and the remaining human factions united in a final stand. They knew that they could not defeat the alien empire using conventional methods. They could not rely on their old weapons or tactics. They would have to use everything they had learned from the plague, from their evolution, from their new abilities. They would have to fight smarter and harder than they ever had before. The battle would not just be for Earth, it would be for the future of humanity and the galaxy itself. The final confrontation took place in the skies above Earth. The evolved ones led a coalition of human forces against the alien motherships in a battle unlike any seen before. The fight was brutal and desperate as alien weapons clashed with the power of the evolved ones. But despite the odds stacked against them, the evolved ones fought with a determination that surpassed all understanding. They knew that if they failed, humanity would be doomed, but if they succeeded, Earth would rise as a new power in the galaxy. As the battle reached its climax, the evolved ones unleashed their full power. Their combined abilities created an unstoppable force that tore through the alien defenses. The enemy ships fell one by one until the final mothership stood alone. The evolved ones launched their last strike, a devastating blast of energy that obliterated the mothership and sent the remaining alien forces retreating into the void of space. The victory was theirs, but the cost was great. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth was left scared but free. The evolved ones stood victorious, not just as survivors, but as the new guardians of the planet. They had evolved beyond their past, and beyond the plague that had once threatened to destroy them. They had proven that humanity was more than just a species. It was a force to be reckoned with, and as the galaxy watched in awe, they knew that humanity had entered a new era, one where they would not just survive but thrive.